there were a bunch of people coming out here, like either pretending the violence wasn't happening, downplaying it, excusing it away. I had one person tweeted at me that I said something about how the movement was riddled with violence in that last tweet that I read, and someone said to me, let me see if I could find it. He said, so I said, I tweeted back at him. He said that I was making blanket statements that they're all Marxists. And I said the national organization was garbage run by Marxists. The movement on the ground was riddled with violence and rioting. These are not blanket statements. They're facts, which is true. Like the national organization, the founder said she's a trained Marxist, and a bunch of them are trained Marxists. And the movement was riddled with violence and rioting. And
particularly well trained because she made a lot of money off the movement. So in terms of Marxist school, that she got like an advanced degree. She did it right.
She's a great Marxist and a great capitalist, which is rare. You don't find both too much. So and then this person responded. I don't want to put anyone on blast or say their names, but this person responded and said, or maybe the mainstream media has made them to be what you are claiming. You can decide.
Right, because every time you watch CNN, they talk about how BLM is a Marxist movement, and
it's unbelievable. And I said, are you serious? The corporate press was completely behind Black Lives Matter and excused away all of the violence. I said, I guess we're just I guess we all just imagined the billions in property damage. Like there, as everyone remembers, the CNN was describing them as fiery but mostly peaceful riots while there's fires in the back and stuff like that. And then I got a whole bunch of other people who I can't believe people still use these arguments, but where they'll post these studies and be like, oh, like 94% of the protests were peaceful. And they will have people who actually have put together these well, here's where all the events were and here's just how many of them became violent. And look, it's a small percentage of that. Now, the way they measure these things is a bit weird.
When two countries are at war, I bet 70% of those populations aren't involved in war.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Or maybe even 90%. How many soldiers actually go out and fight? The countries are still at war.
Well, there's been a bunch of people have made jokes about this, over last year when they were doing this, but they say, the O.J. Simpson was mostly peaceful. Only
rapists that one are mostly time. Non-rapists.
Yes,
how often do they really
mostly
rape?
Don't. Yeah, I mostly am not violent. I'd be like, every violent person is mostly not violent. No one spends 12 hours and 1 minute a day assaulting people and then go, he was mostly violent. I mean, even just taking into account the time he sleeps, it was totally nonviolent. It was 7 hours in a row where he wasn't violent at all, right? So it's just a ridiculous way to measure things. And then, of course, also there were a lot of other people I saw commenting on this study, or not a lot, but several other people who were like, they were like, I saw this study put one down as peaceful that was in my area, and it was very violent. Like businesses were looted and all of this. So I don't even think they're accurate with the way they put these things together. But the major point, the major
COVID
takeaway.
Hospitalizations.
Yeah, exactly. But the major takeaway from all this is that it's no, look, you don't get to, if you have a movement and there's a bunch of violence with that movement, you don't just get to say, well, that's not part of it. The movement's about this, but it's not about that. And all these people would see this right away if it were a right-wing movement or if it was anything like that. It would be obvious right away. Right away, you would look at it and you would be like, oh, yeah, I mean, you can't just say whatever, if there's a KKK rally or something and they're like, well, we want to protect white children, and then they're going around terrorizing black people, you can't say, well, what are you against, protecting white children? Oh, that has nothing to do with it. That's just a few of them late at night. I don't know. There was 95% peaceful people. It's no, that's not. Sorry, you have to own all of that if you want to say you're on board with this movement. And if not, you can denounce the movement, and then say, but I do think they have some grievances that are legit. And if we put this into practice, that probably none of this stuff would be happening, or at least most of it wouldn't be happening. That I think is fine. But yeah, I heard other people, someone else, and you see a lot of this stuff where people's their emotions and their kind of pre-programmed, like the way they've been propagandized, you can just see it coming out. And you can see it if you're not in it and you're kind of, red-pilled on the situation or removed from it, you can see it very easily. But, the people have this attitude where, so they'll say things like, one person said to me, they go, yeah, but I've seen videos of organizers of Black Lives Matter who were trying to tell people to stop the violence, telling them not to loot, not to assault people, not to set buildings on fire. And I was like, yeah, I've seen those too. And good for those people. But I've also seen videos of organizers encouraging the violence, making excuses for the violence. There was a book written about, the case for looting or whatever, something like that. I mean, there's okay, yeah, I'm not saying that didn't happen, but it's not as if if a fucking group, again, once you're in a movement, if you don't get to just say well, there were some people who were against the violent aspects. When there's, people are being murdered, assaulted, terrorized, businesses are being destroyed, you don't get to just say, yeah, well, some people were against it. Okay, fine. But a whole lot of other people clearly weren't. And for us to just come in as a political party and say, we're on board with them, and I just don't and I'll say one more and then we'll move on, because I have talked about this. I'm just reliving the summer of 2020, but it's also, and this is kind of what I mean about the idea of how people are programmed and where the propaganda is that it seems kind of obvious that a lot of this is a real racial bias. And a lot of these same people who claim to hate racism and claim to hate collectivism and all this other stuff, it's they'll be like, well, look, the group is called Black Lives Matter and they're against police brutality. So we're against police brutality and we should be on board with them. And it's yeah, but dude, if there was a group called, White Income Matters and they were against taxation, okay? They're we're against taxation. That's what they say. We're against taxes. And white income matters. And did you know that taxes disproportionately affect white people? You know what I mean? That they pay a disproportionate amount of the income tax. And that's why we're white income matters. And then they were also, by the way, there's this national organization called White Income Matters that said they're trained Nazis, but whatever, don't stress about that. We're not them exactly. We have the exact same name and we work with them and they come to a lot of our rallies and stuff, but whereas whatever. And then every night it devolved into white people going into black neighborhoods and terrorizing them. And they were showing up at restaurants full of black people and demanding that they stand up and say,
sounds like the Klan's making a comeback, dude.
Yeah. I mean, if you had this whole thing, just make it the same thing, make it the mirror image of everything that was happening in the summer of 2020. And then I were to say to you, I were to seriously take the argument to you and be but dude, I mean, I don't know. I mean, we're against taxation too. So I support that movement. Wouldn't you be that's fucking nuts that you would say you support that movement? No, I'm sorry, you can't support that movement. You could in some way go I think in this example, the first thing to say would be this movement is fucking horrible. But yeah, I'm for repealing the income tax. Let's repeal the income tax and then they won't have anything to complain about. And then, yeah, let me denounce all these other horrible things about this movement. Right. So just on the argument alone, the merit of it falls apart if you're not programmed into already being predisposed to believe this shit.